Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of Mordor. See, we can say it now. We don't have to just every conversation we have. It's just like, don't say what won Game of the Year in the stream, okay? Don't say Shadow of Mordor.
Middle-earth. Did a great job on that nominee show, by the way. We're not tipping our hand. I thought,
what happened?
Do you know what won Game of the Year?
I know that an Australian was just on set, and we don't have enough Australians. So having 2 Australians in a row on the lobby, it's
Randolph
amazing.
Ramsey.
Hello.
He's Australian?
Who?
You're Australian?
I'm Australian, yeah.
Tie my kangaroo down
Sport, yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Wallabies and kangaroos and all that stuff.
Can you tell what it is yet? Actually, you know what? I'm not going to make Rolf Harris jokes anymore.
No, it's all
that's not appropriate anymore.
In the same way you can't make Bill Cosby jokes.
No. Wallabies. Drop bears.
They're a real thing.
That's something
they're a real thing.
Google it.
After this. Drop bear.
Randolph,
that's kind of bear you're thinking of.
Randolph, what's your official title here?
I am the managing editor.
Sweet.
Of GameSpot.
He's laughing as he says, ha ha ha.
No,
I'm the managing editor.
I'm the managing editor. I'm the managing editor.
That didn't come from a place of superiority. I'm just saying that I'm usually
home for 2 weeks. I don't care.
I'm usually.
Can you believe they gave me the title of managing editor?
I'm the guy that prods Kevin and other people. I don't usually get on front because Kevin is the guy.
To be careful, he's my boss. So
yes.
In fairness, we all prod Kevin.
Yeah.
So don't feel
in different ways.
Yeah.
In different times of the day.
People come up to me and they're just like,
sticking microphones in his face. But of course, we had our long and drawn out and angry and beautiful and
it was very
wonderful
long this year.
Game of the Year discussions.
They're
you were kind of the puppeteer of the whole thing, I would say, or maybe the master of ceremonies, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I think you guys have sort of covered it a little bit in sort of like other videos, but like this whole thing starts basically with the team, right? And I'm just basically the guy who sort of collates all that information at the start to try and get us to a good place where we can then start talking about, okay, what do we think is actually the best within each of these categories? So, like the place that we start from basically is I just ask people what their favorite games are for the year. And I think there's like 20, 25 people or so, like around the world, including our offices in Australia and the UK
as well.
Yep, and basically I collate all those.
I think we gave us like top 10 or 15 games.
Yeah. So I asked you guys, okay, doesn't matter what platform, as long as it was released in this time period, what are your favorite games for this year? What I do then is I, come up with a list. I break it all down. I assign this, arbitrary number score depending on where it placed in everyone's top 10.
Which is great if you gave him a list of top 10 games, not in order of preference, like I did.
It was
Who
very
sends in a list of 10 games when you ask for a top 10 and doesn't rank them?
It's so sorry.
It
didn't matter in the end, but
it was very clearly in the email. Danny.
You just want a clump of 10 games, right? Just scattered up in a bag. It's my grab bag. My top 10 grab bag.
Yeah, I think Gang Beast was the one I put at the top.
And you know what?
I'm sorry, no offense
to
to Gang Beasts.
No, but I looked at it and went, yeah, Danny has been playing a lot of Gang Beasts this year, so that's okay. I think that's all right.
But these were just
even out, is it?
I know it's a gray area.
We'll see.
But that's like a starting off point for discussion.
Yes,
that doesn't mean anything.
That is our kickoff point. But all that does is basically tell me, okay, these are the games that a lot of people and staff have enjoyed for the year. So what I then do is we all go to this, our first meeting, which is our nominees meeting, right? And essentially from there, I just put a list of, I think, the top 10 for each category that we have, and then the arguments start.
And a list of kind of the 15 ones that didn't necessarily get in, and a couple of those end up getting in as well.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, and then that's when, the discussion starts, and it's free for everyone to say, I don't think this should be in there, or, we usually try and pick, people to champion something. So if it's a game that hasn't been played that much, but, one person is particularly passionate about it, that's the platform to start sort of lobbying for that game.
And you can see it in games like, we'll get to the Game of the Year stuff in a second, but for instance, on PC, like Divinity Original Sin is not a game that a lot of people could have put in like 80 hours. You can't just play that game in like 5 hours and get the gist. You need to like put time in. So like that's one of those games where you could see there were like 5 or 6 people on staff who would put quite a lot of time into that, who would realize it might be a contender, and then those kind of conversations came.
And that's why I think the GameSpot decision is more than just all of our lists collated. It's more than just one person shouting from the mountaintop that they love this game. It's kind of this hybrid of the personal and the collective, because you have that chance to hear someone speak passionately about a game, and maybe you make it. Maybe that influences your decision. Maybe it doesn't. But on the flip side, everyone's voice is already heard, even if they're not comfortable speaking in that environment, because as we've discussed previously on the show, it can be intimidating.
Yes.
So it kind of helps bring that all together.
So let's get to it then. Let's have a chat about some of the games that didn't win Game of the Year. That some people might be saying would be contenders. I'm going to keep an eye on the GameSpot chat, on the Twitch chat, at Daniel Dwyer on the GameSpot chat. If you have any questions yourself, please feel free to throw them in. But just looking at sort of general chat around GameSpot and being in the deliberations as well, I want to just sort of talk about a couple of games. First of all, talking about Chris's sort of, the idea of the personal best against the collective best. We had a 10 out of 10 this year.
I knew it was going to be the first question.
Bayonetta 2. Why doesn't Bayonetta 2 automatically win Game of the Year, Kevin?
It didn't even win Wii U Game
It
of
didn't.
the Year for that matter.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of that comes down to, first of all, just the obvious personal taste. So in that sense, obviously Mark loved Bayonetta 2, and it's hard to argue in some ways against a 10 out of 10 for this game. I played it; it made my personal top 10 list. But there's also the aspect of a game having more meaning to an individual person than it does to the collective, right? And even those of us who played Bayonetta 2, there are still games that resonated more for all sorts of different reasons. And ultimately, we end up sort of going with some of those games that resonated more for all. In this case, you can make the argument for Bayonetta 2 being perhaps a perfect action game, but it's also a whole lot like Bayonetta 1, and it's there are all sorts of things to talk about, and it's not just about whether a game doesn't do things that are wrong, but it's about, do the things that how much do they really matter?
And it's interesting that, like you said, the Wii U category was won actually by Mario Kart 8, and so many people had played both of these games. And then what often happens in these discussions is we say, okay, who's played both? And then argue sort of what your perspective is on this. It's funny. I think most people, even Mark, obviously a massive fan of Bayonetta 2, he also said when he was here a month ago, I'd have no problem with Mario Kart 8 winning the Wii one as well, because the UK office plays it, I think, every day after work now at this stage.
And I guess it's important that, like Chris did mention it, we have to delineate what our reviews are, which is, at the end of the day, a personal opinion that that GameSpot is backing versus our Game of the Year, which really is more of a group reflection of what we felt was the best. So yes, there are going to be instances where a game that has scored higher is somehow beaten by a game that was not as rated as favorably, but and Bayonetta obviously is a good example of this. But when we got to this stage and everyone in the room started talking about their favorite Wii U experiences for the year, we just kept coming back to Mario Kart 8.
Yeah, there wasn't even a question really, when it came down to it, and that's part of the power of the collective, right? We. A voice arises, and eventually the chorus clearly is singing one particular tune. And in this case, that was the particular tune. But that's not anything new in GameSpot's history. I mean, typically, actually, the Game of the Year isn't the highest scoring Game of the Year. I mean, that's nothing new at all. You were going back to when you mentioned EverQuest on the PC, for example. That game certainly was not the highest scoring game of that year. But it's certainly a worthy one. And part of that, too, is in Game of the Year discussions, we really do project ourselves ahead a little bit. And it's really seriously, when we look back on this year, what really is going to be the meaningful game in this particular category?
When we got down to, I guess, the brass tacks of talking about what was going to win Game of the Year, it kind of came down to 3 games. 2 really. But let's talk about that third one, which was talked about a little bit of it as well, which was Divinity Original Sin. What about that game do you think made it a contender and one of the top handful best games of the year? And what ultimately do you think is the reason why we didn't pick it?
I guess I can speak to that, right? Because I played tons of Divinity.
Of both.
What's great is all 3 games, I reviewed all 3 games, come to think of it.
Let's not talk about what the third one is just yet.
Right.
So,
I'm sorry.
So Divinity.
But it does so happen that I've played all of these games to completion, so I'm maybe unique in that in that respect. Divinity is a really special game, and I think I noticed when I was looking at our PC Game of the Year winner page, which obviously Divinity Original Sin was the winner of that particular category. I was looking at it, and somebody in there says, gosh, that looks an awful lot like last year's GameSpot PC Game of the Year, which was Path of Exile.
Yeah.
And yet, those games are absolutely nothing alike. And I think that says a lot about Divinity, honestly. And because people look at this, and I mean, it's up on the screen now. You look at it and you think, oh, it's an overhead perspective, old school looking RPG, right? Oh, I've played Baldur's Gate, or I've played whatever. This doesn't look anything new. Man, you are just so totally wrong about that. And that's what's wonderful about this, is that it proves that you can have so much depth and have so much actual. I'm never really a big fan of the word innovation, because sometimes we use that kind of improperly, but it's a really innovative game with lots of interesting things. And the fact that it merges the familiar with the unfamiliar is one of its greatest achievements.
And the moment to moment in Divinity is so impactful. Like every combat encounter, like nearly every decision you make possibly has a lot larger ramifications.
Yeah.
And like every single battle I played in Divinity was tense. I actually had to plan it through, because you could die. You could die at any single battle in that game. And for me, it made it a really compelling thing.
Yeah, every move you make is an event. Like, everything is an event. It's just not like, oh, I played for 30 minutes.
It's not Diablo.
Like, I just kind of slept through it and clicked and whatever. It's like, no, everything you do, it's an event, and everything has a consequence. Even when you don't expect the consequence, but then when it happens, it's like, oh yeah, I should totally have seen that coming.
Well, regardless of its constant giving of events in combat, Divinity Original Sin was kind of, it came up in conversation. A lot of games came up in conversation. We gave every game its share. I remember there being a sort of a good 15 minutes where we talked about Destiny in terms of, it didn't win any platform categories, but we still talked about it in relation to like its impact. We have a large contingent of people here at GameSpot who are playing it today still. And so many people involved in the deliberations. But ultimately, this big chew out at the end was between the eventual winner, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, and Dragon Age: Inquisition. Chris, why do you think we picked Mordor over Inquisition? What about Inquisition do you think sort of was just not enough to pip Game of the Year?
I mean, I think part of it is sort of the realities of the kind of experiences people are going to be able to have, and this is why we sort of goes back to that balance of the personal versus the collective. Like, to get, I think, I'm engrossed in Dragon Age currently, but I've played about 20 hours of that game. Now, when I play 20 hours of Shadow of Mordor, that is a significantly larger percentage of that game than it is of Dragon Age Inquisition. And the kinds of things that I'm seeing, the kinds of bonds that I'm building, the kinds of combat scenarios I'm getting into, they change as you sort of go throughout the whole game. I think that part of the things that, I don't know, Dragon Age, is it the kind of thing where we know BioWare, it's sort of a known quantity. We know how they do these relationships, and they do them well. And like, the discussions and the interplay you can have is fascinating and engrossing, but it's also, it's a known quantity ground to some extent. Yeah, it is familiar in a way.
Yeah, I think Kevin sort of stated it best, and you came up with this in like our winners deliberation meeting, that Dragon Age is an amazing game, an outstanding game, but Shadow of Mordor and Nemesis system is the thing that people are going to be copying, and I think you mentioned that with Michael on set, just a few minutes ago too. So I guess we weighed both of those things, right? Like I guess in the fullness of time, what are we going to look back on and say this game had an impact? Over and above, like it was an outstanding experience for that year. And I think at the end, that's, for me anyway, that's what tipped Mordor over the other two games that you mentioned, Divinity and Dragon Age.
The funny thing I found during those deliberations was that there was no two camps on this. I feel like people were wavering constantly. I feel like there was a lot of talk about Dragon Age Inquisition, and then people were going, and then some person would remember an instance from Mordor and say, this, and then I remember there was individuals sort of swapping which one they wanted to be on. It was a nightmare. In the end, like it was so.
I believe we took
tough.
2 or 3 votes on this.
Yeah, we did,
and it would change
all
every
the
single
time.
time.
We took votes based on people who and we try not to take the votes aren't like the be all either. It's more of the like, do we think this is what it is?
Yeah.
Let's just do a round table to make sure.
Do we continue on this discussion path? So.
The thing that got to me about Mordor was that we kept talking about the Nemesis system and it being like a wonderful way to that sort of a new mechanic and sort of like ultimately it makes that world so much more interesting because instead of just doing, picking where you want to go on the map, like say other games in that genre, like Infamous Second Son that came out this year, it's like a smorgasbord of stuff that you can do if you want. Pick which thing you want to do, level up, and then go to that area. Whereas in this one, you could be picking what you wanted to do, but then the game will go, no, I'm going to throw that guy in. He's too overleveled for you. You're going to have to run away, or you're going to have to fight him. You're looking for a green guy. It throws you curveballs constantly. And the other thing, which I think maybe ultimately we started talking about in relation to these two games, was that Mordor is just kind of solid. Like, combat-wise, I really enjoyed the combat in that game, far more than I have in the past couple of, say, Assassin's Creed games or whatnot. The world exploring, it's not incredibly varied or massively vast like Skyrim, but it's always interesting. The level design of like the various strongholds and stuff is super varied, and it's almost because it's so good and because all that stuff just kind of works, you forget about it. So it's the Nemesis system that keeps popping up. It's like, oh, that's what makes it stand out. Actually, the game is kind of solid across the board.
Yeah, just those individual elements. I mean, you mentioned the gating. Like, you come to a place where you think, oh, I'm just going to waltz in and do whatever. Oh, no, there's the big dude, and I can't do this after all. And that's basically like the developer keeping you out of a place, but not actually arbitrarily limiting you. And that's actually really hard to do and something we take for granted. There are all sorts of things in games we take for granted that we only notice when they're done poorly. All sorts of things like sound design is one of those things you really only notice non-soundtrack sound when it's bad. You only notice collision when it's bad, And so that's the great thing about Mordor is it has all these things, all these solid things that we can take for granted because they're all just fantastic. And that's the way it should be. We shouldn't have to think about those things.
And I think this year was also instructive in like
on
how some series that have nailed those things for years, you take advantage of it. Like once you realize once it's not there, it's oh my god.
Falls apart. Like Assassin's Creed and Halo, the two games that technically have always been pretty solid bets, and both games end up being like massively disappointing because of technical issues.
And it all and that's of course that's disappointing, but it is like. It's almost good to be reminded in a harsh way that like Michael said, making video games is so hard. Oh my god, the amount of effort that it takes to make this stuff. And then we have these moments in our discussions where we're just like tearing down the best of the best games, just trying to find that articulation between them. It's one of the things that makes those discussions like really intense and kind of a bummer sometimes.
Speaking of which, I want to go to some of the questions because they're coming in. Krabby Prime asks, what was the biggest or most violent argument the staff got into
this year?
Apart from Andy Bauman screaming that Forza Horizon 2 should be Game of the Year.
I mean, to be quite honest, the one that sticks out to me is the very passionate arguments we had around Destiny.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Because there was a lot of conversation about whether that should be even a nominee.
Yes.
In the first place, and I know that the key Destiny people in our team were very very passionate and spoke very eloquently about why this game should be there, and we also had a couple of dissenters as well, right? About Destiny being a mediocre game.
Me and Kevin were on you people are crazy. I get why you like it, but that game is a real dumb shooter.
But it's interesting. I mean, when Jeff was talking about World of Warcraft, a lot of that kind of was hitting home about Destiny, and I want to give Destiny credit because I think regardless of how you feel about Destiny, it's maybe a lot easier for me to see some of its drawbacks because I've been playing, MMOs for forever. And so I look at Destiny and I immediately see the places where it disappoints and the places, the various things. But for a lot of people, in the office, the idea of even a raid. These are people who have never done a raid before in a lot of cases. They've never, so you have Destiny, a game that, for better or for worse, is the one that's showing them this world that they've never really been invited into before because they don't play that type of game.
And that was one of the impassioned arguments that someone made that Destiny made them into a someone who enjoys multiplayer. Before with shooters they were always just a solo guy, but Destiny was the first game that actually pushed them and made them enjoy the social aspect around that topic.
It's interesting you talk about the sort of unique personal experience because one of the questions just come in from Hasoon is did I ever argue for Transistor or did it remain exclusive to my personal list? So Transistor, our personal top 5s aren't on the site yet. I think mine's going up on Christmas Eve, but it's in the top 5 anyway. It's one of my favorite games of the year.
Yep,
but
mine
it's not
too.
a game. But it's not a game
10.
that I would have argued for Game of the Year, outright. Were there any games that you guys enjoyed that will be on the top of your Game of the Year list, but that you never would have suggested for our top one?
The ones that were the one that was at the top of my personal top 5 is the one I went to bat for, and the one that I held forth on for sure, because this is my 7th Game of the Year deliberation. I'm very comfortable. I have this opinion on this game, and I can articulate it really well. Let me do that thing that Jeff was talking about, and make myself large, and put my and bring people into my experience with the game, which is powerful, but of course has its drawbacks. But you were in there for Transistor, but then you also realized, because it was a nominee on the platform on PlayStation 3 or 4, right? But you sort of also realize when to push, and when it deserves a push, and when it feels right, and when to just be nominees. We battle over nominees. That's an honor to be nominated, and having Transistor there. I don't know. It seemed to me you regarded that as that was giving it your diligence, your love, your input.
I know the reason why I love that game so much is that is a genre that has eluded me personally for quite a long time. I've never really gotten into those sort of, I guess, what would you call them, character RPGs or whatever, or that sort of isometric strategy game. I never played any of those games. I never really got into them before. So I knew that's why it was important to me. And what I think you'll often find when we go to comments on, the comments for the video on this when it goes on YouTube or on GameSpot, is that people know what their favorite game is, but when you're in a room, it's like trying to pick out the what Christmas tree with your family. You're never going to get the one you want. You have to have this it totally changes how you sort of perceive quality when you talk about a group instead of your personal one, because the personal one's usually very clear.
For me it was Pokemon. It's not my top 1, but it's in my top 5, and I would I have had many arguments with people in this organization about the merits of Pokemon, and it was going to be a futile argument to try and push that across the line. But I know why I enjoy that game.
Yeah.
And I try and articulate it, and
Jigglypuff.
I'm a Jigglypuff guy, right? So, and I know, Lord knows, Kevin, I've tried to bring you across with me, but you just refuse.
I haven't crossed to the dark side yet. But there's also something else in there too, and I think that's just, as people who have done this for so long, I think we all have an instinctive understanding of the difference between the thing that is best and the thing that is the thing we like the most.
Yeah.
And, for example, in previous years, Deadly Premonition is one of my favorite games of the outgoing generation. But the idea of standing up in a room and passionately defending a kind of broken game to be called Game of the Year, the idea of that flabbergasts me, and yet anybody that's played Deadly Premonition understands what I'm talking about. That game, it is absolutely possible to call that a personal 10 out of 10, and absolutely possible to call that game a personal 1 out of 10. There's no way I would have, because I understood that it's not really deserving of that kind of honor. Or Ninja Blade, which is another game from previous years. I just love Ninja Blade. The idea of standing up in a room and trying to argue that for being nominated for Game of the Year is ludicrous to me. But this year...
Which is not to say you didn't make impassioned arguments for both of those games in other categories.
In other categories, for story and things like that, or for music.
As I'm having flashbacks over here.
You can chance your arm a bit, and trying to squeeze
for
it
a little
into.
bit. But this year, I'm trying to think of something that I had no Ninja Blade or Deadly Premonition really.
For me,
this year.
Cannon Brawl is in my top 5. I didn't try and push it into top PC game because I know not enough people had experienced it, and I think the reason I like it is because I grew up playing Worms and stuff like that.
And it's not to take anything away from these games, but it is, it's to contextualize what it means for GameSpot to give an award and what it means for Danny O'Dwyer to give an award, and I think that having
doesn't mean shit.
having
nobody's getting a sequel out of a Danny O'Dwyer award. To see if Hatoful Boyfriend 2 turns up anytime soon.
You'll have those
that's
games
happen,
already.
Right?
Your face on a pack shot.
Hatfield Boyfriend is a sure
collusion.
It's a sure thing. Oh, but oh gosh, what was I thinking about? I will say that there are a couple games that I feel maybe didn't get their due just because of not enough people playing them. So I would throw out The Vanishing of Ethan Carter as one of those games.
Sean McInnes, who reviewed it for us,
that,
of course, is not working at GameSpot anymore. And
Yeah, and he championed that game, and I championed that game on his behalf. But there came a point where
on your behalf
it got
too.
nominated on my behalf because I love that
nominated.
game. It's in my it's my third favorite game of the year. Like it's in my top 5. And of course, this War of Mine is another game that I think maybe deserved more due than we ever managed to really give it. But I also have other stuff on my top 10 that I. Like Fantasia, Music Evolved. I think like 5 people played that game besides me. But
yo, guess what? A lot of video games came out in 2014.
Yeah,
it's hard to play them all.
right?
But we had a massive amount of people involved in those discussions, and I think it's pretty unanimous. We're all super pleased with the winner, Middle Earth: Shadow of Mordor. So if you have any ideas on what you think should have been Game of the Year, you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments on the video on demand version of this here video.